Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to JMT's Expert Speaker webinar series today. We're going to wait just a couple more seconds because we have a few more people getting logged in, and we will be right back. Okay, thank you again for joining JMT Consulting. I'm Melissa Waters, Manager of Events and Programs. We are happy to have Michael Davidson presenting today on the 2 reasons why your board won't fundraise. This webinar is sponsored by JMT Consulting. We're an ERP and financial management solutions firm with 28 years experience that specializes in nonprofit. And we work with a wide variety of software partners to find the best solution for your nonprofit. I'd like to share a few housekeeping notes, and then I'll turn it over to Michael. If you have any questions during the webinar, please submit your questions in the box on the control panel to your right. We will answer those questions at the end of the webinar. You'll also receive a survey at the end of the webinar to tell us how we did today. And we are recording this webinar, and we will email the recording and the slides to you as well. Finally, I'd like to introduce Michael. He is a consultant specializing in nonprofit board development, management support, leadership transition, and executive coaching for nonprofit managers. He has over 30 years experience in nonprofit board and managerial leadership and has provided board training and retreat facilitation for more than 150 nonprofit organizations. We're happy to have him today, and with that, I will turn it over to Michael.
All right, good morning. Anybody having any trouble hearing me? I hope not. I can raise the volume. If you've got a problem, please send in a note. But the focus of this webinar is nonprofit boards and fundraising. In my experience, people who join nonprofit boards, they really care about the mission, and they're willing to roll up their sleeves to do governance work and financial work and so on and so forth. But almost every executive director I talk to has one major complaint. Why is my board not doing more in fundraising? And so this webinar really focuses on that question. And so I'm going to give you the answer at the beginning as opposed to the end, and then we'll work through that as we go along. What I've seen is that there really are 2 reasons why board members don't fundraise. The first is they don't really care enough. And we'll talk about what that means. When I say they don't care enough, they really don't care enough about the organization. And we'll talk about what that means. And secondly, even equally, probably more common, they're too anxious. Raising money is not something they ever learned how to do, and when you go into something that you don't really know how to do, you get a little bit anxious. So we're going to address both of those reasons and talk about very practical solutions as to how you can overcome them. So let's take the first one, that they don't really care enough. It's a very interesting phenomenon. Board members come to nonprofits because they really believe in the change, that your organization is committed to, your vision, what your organization is intending to do to make the world a better place, which is your vision, and how you make that change, which is your mission. Unfortunately, while that belief has continued on a cognitive level, not enough has happened to create the emotional connection necessary to motivate them to use their networks to cultivate potential donors. And this is really, for me, an important distinction. We may know some things cognitively and intellectually, but unless there is the emotional connection, we're not really going to be able to get them done. So let's talk about what establishing that emotional connection would mean. They came for the mission, but they lost touch with it. What happens is most of the contact that they have with the organizations is attending board meetings and working on committees. This is great. They're working together with fellow board members, and their interaction is with fellow board members. However, little time is spent on experiencing the mission and accumulating the stories about your impact that will motivate them and potential donors. And this is a really interesting part. Fundraising, people talk about elevator pitches and all that kind of stuff, and they talk about getting the data on how the money is used and what percentage of the money is used for program and all that kind of stuff. And that's important, but it is not as important as board members having stories that they can tell. It is stories that people remember, and it is stories that motivate people to become donors. So let's take a look about how we make that change. It's really not very difficult to do. Number one is bring the mission into the board meetings. You look at your board agendas, and they've got all kinds of details about the finance committee and the audit committee and the recruitment and so on and stuff. No space on there which talks about the mission. So how do we do that? Very simply, I would like to see at every board meeting what some executive directors have called a mission moment, where there's a presentation by a staff member, not on the statistics of their program, but on some exciting results, a great story, an impact on somebody's life. Maybe also bring in a client if the structure of your organization allows that. But the most important focus is that this is not a discussion about the details of the program and how it works. It's really just a really good story that you can remember. The second thing is, in addition to bringing the mission into the board meetings, you really need to bring board members to the mission. And this is an area that a lot of organizations have trouble doing. They get board members to commit to attending board meetings. But I've been introducing, and many organizations have been doing this, an expectation that every board member visit programs some number of times every year, whether it's 3 times a year, twice a year, it doesn't matter. But they've got to visit programs, and this should be an expectation that is communicated not just to your current board, but to all new board members. Secondly, with respect to those, with respect to the stories that board members get, what I like to see happen is that when board members come to a meeting, any board member who's been on a visit to a program since the last board meeting will report on what they learned, and what are the stories that they heard. So now I've gone to visit a program, so I've got the story, and I can tell it to people that I'm talking to about contributions, but you've got my story as well. So now we got double stories. And the other advantage of having board members report on what they've learned is nobody wants to be the only person on the board who never has a story to tell. So again, a way to reconnect board members with their passion for the mission. The second concern that I have is they don't really care enough. And part of this is that they really need to have this deep kind of connection with programs. And so one of the things that some board members have been doing is, especially for organizations that have multiple programs, is assign a board member to a program area, not to provide oversight, not to supervise, but to learn, to talk to staff, to talk to clients, to be the person on the board. If somebody's got a question, what's going on in our daycare centers, there's a board member who knows something about that and can talk to that. And again, this is simply a version of that when your organization has multiple program areas. The second area, for me, is equally interesting. Board members are too anxious, but they don't express this anxiety. They express this anxiety by not doing what it is that you want them to do, which is raise money. So it's a little bit more like a little bit of passive resistance because of this. So let's take a look at what that anxiety is all about and how we get past it. When board members are asked at a board meeting or a session, whatever it is, why don't you want to fundraise? What's the problem? And they always come up with 3 reasons. Number 1 is fear of damaging a relationship. Look, this is a good friend of mine. We work together. We've got a great relationship. I've known them for years. I have no idea what will happen if I ask that person for a contribution. This may kill our friendship. They may not want to give me a contribution. They may feel uncomfortable because I'm asking them for the contribution. And the next time we pass each other on the street, they cross to the other side so they can avoid me. And somehow we're afraid that this will damage a relationship. That's number one. Number two is a fear of rejection. Nobody likes to be rejected. We don't want the situation where I ask you for something and you tell me no. Oh my God, I fall off my chair. That feels terrible. I've been personally rejected in this situation. The third is reciprocity. And reciprocity is really what people call quid pro quo fundraising. I'm doing a walk for a marathon next week, and I'm going to be running in a marathon. And so I'd like you to sponsor the organization that I'm running for. And so it turns out 2 months later, you're going to be doing a bike ride, and you're going to ask me to support that bike ride. And so what happens? It's a wash. So every time I ask somebody for money, that person is going to come back and ask me for money for their causes. So why bother? I might as well just write the check to the organization. So those are the three reasons. So I want to deal with them one by one. The key about damaging relationships is it's an unknown. And this kind of relates to rejection as well. It's an unknown. You don't know what's going to happen when you get into that conversation, and not knowing what's going to happen when you get into a conversation is anxiety provoking. We don't know where it's going to go. So the simple thing that I tell board members, and to me, it's rather simple. You never want the first conversation that you have with someone to be the conversation when you ask them for money. If that's the first time they learn about your involvement in your organization, that rejection, that damaging relationship, it comes up. It could happen. So what I ask board members to do is very simple. It's a common human practice. We're with a friend, we're sitting down having a cup of coffee, like in the picture, and I run out of the thing I was talking about. So we're talking about some book we both read, or we're talking about what the New York Rangers have done in their last games, or the Nets, the Mets, whatever, right? And we reach a point in the conversation where we've run out of discussion of that particular topic. Nothing more to be said about the Rangers. Then what happens at that point? We run out of that topic, there's a silence. And we have two options at that point. We can say to our friend, oh, it was great talking to you, bye. We don't do that. What do? We scrub our minds and we look for another topic to talk about. And why do we do that? If we're finished talking about the Rangers, which we were talking about, why are we looking for another topic? And the simple reason is that's the purpose of a conversation. The purpose of a conversation is not about the subject matter. The purpose of a conversation with a friend is to keep them in connection with you, right? They're your friends. You want to stay with them as long as possible. So we search our minds and we come up with some other topic. What I suggest to board members is when you're in that spot, the conversation is lagged and you're looking for another topic, talk about the organization that you're involved in. Well, let me tell you, I was at a board meeting last week and one of the board members visited this program and he had a conversation with this kid, and it was amazing what that kid told him about what was going on for him in that program. That's it. You're not asking for money. You're informing the person about your connection with the organization. When the time comes to ask them for a contribution, to come to a gala and so on and so forth, you know whether or not you're going to get a yes, because you've already laid the groundwork in these informal conversations. So it's a way of getting over the anxiety. And also, frankly, it's also a great way to practice talking about the organization and asking the other person questions about what they do and see if there's some point of connection between your organization and what your friends do, what their children do. There's always a connection. It's important, though, to remember everybody talks about elevator pitches. An elevator pitch is not a bad thing because it forces you within the organization to really compress what you know and the important points. But that's not what you want to do in a conversation. You do not want to give a speech, right? What you really want to do is find out about the other person's interests until you find a connection, some concern or interest that they have that provides an opportunity to tell a story about your organization. So you're not lecturing people, you're not selling people in that way, but you are using that in the back of your mind so you know the things you want to say when you get the opening. This is not rocket science. This is what every salesperson knows to do. This is how sales take place. No salesperson will ever introduce a product to you until they found the need that you have for it. Once they've figured out by talking to you what your interests are, concerns are, blah, 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 and found a place that you have a need, then they'll sell you what they have to sell you. There's an apocryphal story, I have no idea whether it's true, but people tell it about the person that founded Home Depot. And he said, I don't sell drills, I sell holes. I look for people who need a hole. If they need a hole, then I can sell them a drill. But I can't sell them a drill until I know that they need the hole. So in order to have done this, in order to do this in a conversation, you need to have the stories that we talked about earlier by having visited programs. The quid pro quo issue is really interesting because when we're doing this, and this is it's a change in focus on fundraising. When we're involved in fundraising, very often it is quid pro quo. I give to your organization, you give to mine. So what does that mean, right? When I left the board, you left with me, right? Because the only reason you gave was because I, Michael, asked you. And if Michael's no longer involved, then I'm no longer involved. Right? What we're trying to do is shift the focus. We're not trying to do this quid pro quo, I give to yours, you give to mine. What we're trying to do is cultivate a relationship with a person such that they will want to give to the organization and such that they'll want to continue to give to the organization even if I'm not there anymore, that they've built a relationship with the organization. And that's the job, I believe, of board members, which is to cultivate relationships with people, bringing them information, bringing them to events, talking to them about things such that they become interested and ultimately become donors, but long-term donors. We jumped a little bit ahead. The process of, the process of doing this is really interesting because what it asks of board members, well, let me go back to a data point, an interesting data point. One of the interesting questions is, what percentage of first-time givers give again? People that you asked once to come to a gala, they bought a seat, you asked them to buy a number of raffle tickets, come to a golf event, whatever it is. What percentage of first-time givers give again? And the answer to that question is not many, 10 to 15%. So all that work of getting these one-time gifts goes out the window. We got the gift, but then we got to do it all over again next year. And maybe with different people and so on and so forth. The real work of board members, for example, if you're having a gala, the real work of board members takes place after the gala in reaching out to people in a targeted way, because you're looking for people that do have access to means. That's what fundraising is all about. But board members following up after the gala. How many of your organizations, once the gala is over, everybody breathes a sigh of relief, we're done? No, that's when the work begins. Board members should be getting lists, targeted lists of people to try to give them a call, say thank you, no more ask, say thank you, talk about the organization, ask them they got questions, maybe invite them to something and so on and so forth. The gala is a way to identify potential givers, but they only become real givers if you work with them and to bring them along. How many people should a board member cultivate? If you can get your board members to work on cultivating 4 people every year, 4 people who have the potential to give significant gifts, and just work on cultivating. And they don't even have to be the ones that do the ask. If you've been working the board member, the potential funder, well enough, somebody else, if you're uncomfortable doing the ask, somebody else can make the ask. The executive director, development director, go with you to make a significant ask from this person. But that's what you're trying to build. We're trying to build strategic fundraising that uses really the skills of board members and removes these various anxieties from it. So I think we have time for questions. Did any questions come in, Melissa?
We don't have any questions just yet. Everybody remember, though, if you'd like to ask questions, if you look on the questions portion of your control panel, you can type them in and we can read them out to Michael. Looks like we might have a question coming in. Let's see.
Great.
Michael, if they want to learn more about this information, can you tell us a little bit about your website that they can visit?
Sure. There are 2 sources. I've got some stuff on my website, numbers of articles that I've written, things I call thoughts from the coach boat, because it's rowing is a theme that I use. And those thoughts from the coach boat are very good. There's another site, though, that I would really recommend, and it's not my site. It's run by a good friend of mine. But I really highly recommend it for ongoing information. And the site is called askingmatters.com. And it's totally devoted to working with board members on how to make an ask. And they have weekly newsletters, they have tools, and things like that. It's a membership site. And so once you sign on to it, you'll begin to get ongoing stuff, but they also have some articles on the site. And I think askingmatters.com is one of the best places to go for this. And there's some stuff on my website, but it's not as much on my website as on the Asking Matters website. And one of the things about the Asking Matters website, which you really might find interesting, is that there's a little test that you can take when you go on the site, which talks about asking styles. And it's a very interesting concept, because what they do is they use the concepts from Myers-Briggs. Myers-Briggs exams, you all know those. You know, everyone falls into one of 4 categories as to whether or not you're thinking analytically or intuitively, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert. And what he does with that, he got a little test that you can take, and it tells you what your asking style is. And the whole point of that is this understanding that not every board member is the same. And different people with different personality structures are going to be comfortable doing things differently. So, for example, the person who is the intuitive extrovert, that box, right? That's the person who can go into a room full of strangers and talk to everybody all the time about what they're doing. That's extroverts. They don't need a plan. They'll just tell them stories, so on and so forth. Very comfortable. On the other side, we have somebody who's the analytical introvert. To do that would make them crazy. But they can analyze things. They can write letters. They can think about data. They can find ways to connect with donors in a different way. So I highly recommend Asking Matters to you as a real place for ongoing support. And it's totally devoted just to helping board members learn how to ask.
Great. we have a few other questions that came in.
Sure.
First is, have you ever seen a board split between a giving and governance status?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Yes, it says, have you ever seen a board split between a giving and governance status?
Wonderful, wonderful question. So, one of the things you're going to see on the Asking Matters website is a link to a product, which is available. And it's a product actually that Brian and I developed. And this product is called Rubber Stamps Don't Fundraise. And it's a four series of learning exercises with exercises and recordings and so on and so forth. But it's really based on the proposition that if board members are not involved in the governance of the organization, and by governance of the organization, I mean its financial strength, its directions, its challenges, all of that kind of stuff, the real governance work of the board. If they're not doing that, they're not going to be good fundraisers. They're not going to have the motivation to be fundraisers if they don't feel an ownership of the organization. So what we do in that product and Rubber Stamps Don't Fundraise is talk about how you do these things, how you get your board engaged in governance. But it's a great question. It should be, every board should be both. I don't think people can fundraise if they don't feel ownership of the organization. And they feel ownership of the organization if they are realistically involved in the important decisions and questions and policies and plans of the organization. So I don't see them as two separate things. They're the same thing.
All right, thank you. So here's another question. What if the board is not giving?
Wonderful question. The board must give. There is no way that a board member can reach out to friends and colleagues for contributions if they're not making their own personal contribution. Impossible. You don't have the moral position to do it. If you go to ask somebody, you say, I'd like you to, contribute $500 for this golf event. That's great. So what are you contributing? Oh, me, nothing. I'm just on the board. Well, thank you. I'll try somebody else. Every board member must contribute. Now, with that, there are two ways that organizations structure that expectation. And it's a conversation you need to have with your board members. And people should not be, it should be an expectation that's put up front for new board members. But with the current board, there are two ways that this is approached. One is what people very commonly call a give-get, right? That every board member is expected to be responsible for some number, let's say $2,000 every year. And they can either reach that $2,000 by their own contributions or by bringing friends in. Okay, but there's a problem with that, because two problems. One is if it's at $2,000, there are going to be some people on your board who feel that they really got away easy. $2,000 for them is a no-brainer. They don't even have to think about it. So these people could give much more, but since you put $2,000 as the standard, that's all they're going to give. And in addition, on the other side, there may be people that you want on your board for a variety of reasons who would not have the ability to contribute $2,000, but you want them on your board. So what many organizations do now is they say that the expectation is that every board member make a personally significant gift. Personally significant. What do I mean by personally significant? It means it's a check that's a little difficult for you to write. Not so easy. You got to think about that one before you write it. Okay, so, but what's significant is now there has to be a discussion on the board level to get an agreement from the board that it's important to do this, that every board member must make a contribution. Once you have that agreement, then how do you get the personally significant gift? It's a conversation, I believe, that either the board chair or the chair of a resource development committee has with every board member, and basically says, let me tell you what I'm giving. Talk to me about what you can give. And if the person you're talking to says, the best I could do really is $100 this year, and you drive what kind of car? Let's talk seriously. We need these contributions. And so every board should contribute. But I think the standard from my point of view, should be give a personally significant gift. I think setting a give-get has more problems than it's worth.
All right, thank you. So another question, how often do you ask a potential donor for contributions?
Not too often. Not too often. I would not want to approach anybody more than once a year. It's burnout. I want to work towards with my donors, not, I want you to come to the golf event and the picnic event and the this event and the that event, right? I want to be working with the donors to move them towards the point of major donors. I think there should be multiple contacts with your donors every year, inviting them to things, having coffee with them, talking about what's going on in the organization, answering their questions, introducing them to other people. That's great. But I don't think there should be more than one ask each year. I want it to be a significant ask, but only one. They burn out. And that's when they're gonna cross the street if they see you coming. If they know you're gonna be asking for multiple events.
So what are some other tactics to help the board feel not just involved with the mission, but also getting them on board to help with fundraising?
I think the case has to be made to the board as to why this is necessary. What do we need? What is it that we cannot do now because we do not have the unrestricted resources to do? That's a conversation with the board. And I think it then becomes important to talk about the board contribution in the context of the entire revenue plan. So we're expecting so much from state government and so much from grants and so much from earned income. How much do we need from the board? And what can't we do if we don't have that money? That case has got to be made to the board as to why it's important. And it's about a number. I'd want to establish every year some number that I'm expecting to get from my board, and in total. And the board has to agree to that because it's going to be part of the budget, and it's in there in the budget line. You agree to it? Good. So now let's talk about how you would do it. But the case has to be made. It's not automatic. Some organizations, board members say, oh, you got state contracts, you got plenty of money. You know what state contracts are. They cost more than they bring in. That case has got to be made to the board members. But you're right. You can't ask them to do it unless you've convinced them of why it's important for them to do it.
Okay, we have a few other questions.
Okay.
Next question, what initial steps would you suggest for an established board that is pivoting towards increased fund development?
An established board that's pivoting towards increased, then I would really have the conversation with them about cultivation. What there needs to be to make this work is every board member needs to have a plan. What are you going to do? Who's on your radar for this year? And if you look on my website, I've got somewhere in my board tune-up kit, some examples of a template for a board member action plan. But it's a one-on-one conversation. Well, first it's a conversation with the board as a whole that talks about the importance of major donor cultivation. That case has got to be made. Then it's a series of one-on-one conversations, either with your development staff, if you have some, or with the chair of the board, or with the chair of the Resource Development Committee. Every board member needs to have a plan. And there has to be a process to follow up on that plan, which means you've got to have a data system, something like Salesforce, something like that, a customer relations database where you keep information about all of your potential donors and all of your donors. When was the last time anybody spoke to this person? How much have they given? What's the pattern of their giving? You got to have a database to capture that information. But in terms of working, so that's part of what you need to do. But the other part of what you need to do is to get agreement from the board that this approach of major donor cultivation is important. And then the next step is working one-on-one with each board member about who they're going to cultivate. And it doesn't have to be one of their friends. They can work on somebody else's friend. That's fine. But what's the plan?
Okay, next question. Does establishing fundraising metrics obligating board members to a fundraising goal help after your suggestions are at the center of their effort?
Could you repeat the question, Melissa? I'm sorry.
Yeah, it says, does establishing fundraising metrics obligating board members to a fundraising goal help after your suggestions are at the center of their effort?
Absolutely. I think there's got to be metrics. There's got to be an expectation. It's going to be different for each board member, but that's why this notion of having an action plan for each board member, it then demystifies it all, makes it all possible. For me, I say, look, I got 4 people. These are the 4 people I got to work on this year. So this is what I'm going to do. It takes a lot of the anxiety out by having a plan for each board member, and it's going to be different. But you also, at the same time, have got to have a plan for the board as a whole. So, and interestingly, you want to keep reporting back to the board, just the way you have a financial report and so on and so forth. How are we doing as against our goal? Not, obviously, we're not reporting on each individual board member, but how are we as a collective doing towards our goals? You know, we set a goal of $100,000. It's now February, March. Now April, God bless. It's now April, right? We've got 8 months left of the year. Where are we at the end of April as against our goal of $100,000? We've raised 2,000 or we've raised 50,000. Where are we? And then once we see where that is, that can lead into, okay, what do we need to do to reach our goal? We need to do something different. So, but having metrics, I think, is very important. You never want to be asking a board, go raise as much money as you can. That's a loser.
So we have a few more questions, Michael.
Okay.
So my board often relies.
I'm glad we provoked this many questions. Wonderful.
Yeah, we've got some great questions coming in. So the next one says, so my board often relies on a phone script or email samples to guide their conversations with donors. Tips on how to use templates strategically without sacrificing authenticity.
I wouldn't use a template. I would use what people talk about as an elevator pitch. I want the facts that we all share, that are the key facts, and let each of us figure out how to present it, what our style will be. If board members say, I can't figure it out, then at least, find out from that board member, look, these are the things that we know about our organization. What are the important things for you? And then maybe someone on staff can draft several different kinds of letters, because each of us is different. And each of us would find stressing some aspect of the organization different than somebody else. So you can't use a single template for every board member, because we're all different. And if we can't get board members to write their own letters, maybe then we start with a template. But the other thing is, we could do this at a board meeting. Suppose you have, okay, we're going to talk about our fundraising letters, right? So let's break up into small groups, and let's each of us talk about, we have the elevator pitch, we have all the data about the organization. Why don't we all talk about how we would approach it? And maybe get some suggestions from other members in the group. So you make it a working thing at a board meeting to talk about what you would want to include in your letter. Because the more I'm committed to what I'm saying, the more likely it is that I'm going to follow up. If you're going to be talking simply about how many trucks went out, and I'm going to be talking about how many people got fed, and what happened in their families. We're very different. How many trucks went out is really important, but you're going to write a different letter than I'm going to write. I can't use your letter about trucks. I don't care about trucks. Yeah, I know they're important, but I want to know about kids who get fed and what that does to their schoolwork. So I'll write a different letter than you will. But maybe if you have these small group discussions, people can learn from each other what, different possibilities, different emphases.
All right, next question. How do you handle older donors who have cut their gift?
That's life. This is inevitable. But one of the things you can do with long-term donors who've cut their gifts, because that's what happens over life, right? Life changes, is two things. Number one, be upfront with them about that. And ask them, look, are there people that you know that we should be talking to, that you could introduce us to, right? Use them in a different way. The other thing I would do, and I've done it, and I'm not a fundraising consultant by any stretch of the imagination, but the other thing that many organizations do is they focus, especially where they've got long-term donors, they focus on the bequest process. They focus on planned giving, right? They focus on, with that particular donor. I mean, one I've seen was very interesting, right? There was the approach that they took was, okay, here's what I'd like. I'd like you to leave us a bequest in your will. And here's what we would like you to be able to do. We would love it if you could give us a gift that we'll put it in a segregated account, a capital account. Give us a gift large enough that the money that account makes in the market or however else we're doing it is equal every year to your gift. So you will continue giving in perpetuity. That's an interesting conversation with somebody who's been a long-term donor and consistent donor. They should be putting you in their wills, and you should be upfront about it. It's a great conversation. Plus the conversation, who else you should talk to. But people's lives change. They have less money to spend. But interestingly, and I've seen this, while people may be increasingly short of cash, they have assets. And those assets, the apartment that they bought 50 years ago, and they're going to sell it. Someone's going to sell it. It's a lot of money. In one organization I worked with, very interesting, a long-term member, the religious organization, long-term member came to the leader, the spiritual leader, and said, I haven't been contributing very much to this organization, but I love it. This organization has meant everything to my life. My apartment is going to be sold when I die. I am now committing to a gift of $100,000 to this institution out of my will. I know my kids are going to be taken care of. Everything's okay. I'm going to put that in my will. Huh? It's out there. Nobody knew to ask this lady for money. So with those long-term donors, think about who they can introduce you to. Take the fact of the reduction in their gifts as a reality. It's a reality of their life. But who can you talk to? Who can they introduce you to? And would they consider a bequest?
All right, we have 2 more questions to go.
Okay, this is great.
What if a donor doesn't want involvement?
I don't know what it means that they don't want involvement. If they're donating, they're interested in something about the organization. And so it's a conversation with them. What can we do? What would help you? What would you like to see? Not what I want you to see, but what would you like to see that interests you about the organization? Ask them. Sure, sometimes people say, look, I got it. I got it. Send me a letter once a year and I'll send you a check. I've given to this organization long enough. I understand what they're doing. I'm okay with that. Some may not be okay with that. Some may want more, but you have to, it's individualized. It's an individual conversation.
All right, and last question, how do you attract new board members?
That's like a big question. That's a really big question. I mean, a couple of things. Number one, you've got to start out being clear. And one of the things that I've been working on, and I've got samples in that board tune-up kit, is a board prospectus. And a board prospectus is like if you're looking for somebody to fill a job. The board prospectus tells you about why this is a wonderful organization and what the role of the board is in making it so wonderful. It's a one-page document, maybe a little over one page, but it's like a selling piece. Then the second thing is figuring out what you need. And I don't know the answer to that. There really needs to be this conversation. What's missing on our board? What are the skill sets we're missing? What are the particular corporate sectors that we don't have access to? What does the diversity of our board look like? Does our board look like anything like the clients that we're serving? What's the balance between men and women? What's the balance between young and old? It's a grid, and I've got, again, there's a sample in my board tune-up kit. You have to know what you're looking for, then you can find it. And so your governance committee can work on that thing. Then, okay, how do you find candidates? Two ways. Every community has got different kinds of things to do this. United Ways usually get involved in this. But one of the things that I've done with this is throw a party. Somebody on your board host a cocktail party. And what we're trying to do is get people to that party who might be interested in joining the board. So how do we find who these people are? We ask our friends, our funders, people we work with, and so on and so forth. Here's what we're doing. We're looking for potential board members. Is there anybody you think we should invite? And ask all the board members, who should we invite? And we invite all these people to a nice party, and we tell them all about the organization and all about the wonderful work that the board has been doing and the contribution that the board is making towards achieving this mission, and let us know if you're interested in talking. I've done this several times. We always come away with a list of people to talk to and get some board members out of it. So it's a very simple way. Another thing, third thing, is if you've got large corporate presences in your communities, large corporations. What I mean by large, I don't know, but large corporations, right? Large corporations want their middle-level managers to serve on nonprofit boards. In New York City, I'm working with a program, actually it's a for-profit venture, where these corporations pay us to train and recruit board members from within their organization. That's how important it is to them. And we're working with groups like Citibank and Wells Fargo and Google and Microsoft and all these people, right? Because the corporations find it of extraordinary value for their people to be serving on boards. Number one, it's good public relations, but number two, it's a way for their middle managers to develop leadership skills that they couldn't develop otherwise. So I'd start thinking about contacts with the corporations that are in your community, and then think about writing a board prospectus and then using it at this kind of board recruitment cocktail party.
Great. Thank you so much, Michael. That wraps up the questions. Somebody did ask for Michael's website again, and that's boardcoach.com.
Yep.
But with that, I'm going to launch a poll while we're wrapping things up. So we appreciate everyone joining us today, and I want to thank Michael for his time. We hope you enjoyed the presentation and that you'll join us for future events.
Great conversation. Thank you guys for the questions.
Yeah. And if you need the recording or need to get in touch with Michael, we will provide all of that information in a follow-up email that will be sent tomorrow. And we thank you again and hope everyone has a great day.
Okay, let me just one last pitch. On my website, there's a little button on the home page where you can subscribe to my website, not to my website, to my blog. And I write maybe once every 6 weeks or something like that, topics about nonprofit boards that have come up for me and that interest me out of my work. So if you're interested in being added to that list, just go into that button, press the button, and you'll be getting the emails.
Great.
And if you
Thank
don't
you
like
so
them, you can always unsubscribe.
Hopefully they'll all get great value out of it. And we will, again, include that in our thank you email tomorrow. So everyone have a great day and join us again next month.
Okay. Thank you all.
Thank you.